Imagine sitting in a room, a party maybe, or a meeting, or just a dinner table full of people who love the sound of their own voices. You're talking, laughing, performing the version of yourself you think people want to see. And in the corner, quiet, almost invisible, sits someone who hasn't said much at all. You glance over, they seem disengaged, maybe a little awkward, maybe just shy. You move on. But here's what you didn't notice. They noticed everything. The slight hesitation before you answered that one question, the way your smile arrived half a second too late, the story you told loudly, and the detail you quietly left out. The introvert in the corner isn't distracted. They're not bored. They're not struggling to keep up. They're analyzing, picking up patterns in how you speak, how you react, even what you're trying to hide. And the unsettling part? You won't notice it happening, not even once. Because introverts don't need to talk to understand people. They observe, deeply, constantly, quietly. And once you understand what that silence is actually doing, once you see the architecture behind it, you will never look at a quiet person the same way again. We live in a world that has confused volume with value. We promote the loudest voice in the room. We mistake fluency for intelligence. We call someone a natural leader because they filled the silence, not because they understood it. And so, for decades, introverts have been handed a narrative about themselves that simply isn't true. You're too quiet. You need to speak up more. You're holding yourself back. But what if the silence isn't a limitation? What if it's a method? Howard Gardner spent years dismantling the idea that intelligence is one single thing, one number on a test, one performance on a stage. He argued compellingly that human intelligence is multiple, that it lives in the body, in music, in nature, in the space between people, that the child who can't sit still isn't broken, that the student who stares out the window isn't absent. They're just thinking differently. And introverts, deeply, structurally, think differently. Not worse, not better, differently. The surface behavior is stillness. The deeper truth is intense internal processing. While extroverts reach outward to think, talking to discover what they believe, introverts reach inward. They simulate, they replay, they test hypotheses about people and situations in the privacy of their own minds, often arriving at conclusions that the loudest person in the room never even approached. This is not mysticism. This is neuroscience. Introverts show higher baseline activity in the prefrontal cortex, the region associated with planning, reflection, and long-term thinking. They process dopamine differently. They don't need external stimulation to feel engaged. They are, in a very real sense, already stimulated by the act of paying attention. So when you walk away from that party thinking the quiet one was unimpressed or uninvolved, they were watching you build your argument. And quietly, privately, they already found the flaw in it. But let's sit with something uncomfortable for a moment. Because if introverts are so perceptive, so analytically gifted, why do they so often suffer in the very systems designed to develop intelligence? Why does the classroom reward the child who raises their hand, not the one who fills pages of private notes after school?
Why does the workplace promote the one who dominates the meeting, not the one who sends the quiet email at 11 p.m. that actually solves the problem? This is where psychology gets honest with us. Benjamin Bloom, one of the most important thinkers in the history of education, built a taxonomy of thinking. Most people know the bottom: remember, understand, apply. But the top is where it gets extraordinary: analyze, evaluate, create. And here's what Bloom understood that most systems still refuse to accept. Deep learning, real learning, is not comfortable. It is not performed. It is not applause-worthy in the moment. It happens in the friction, in the confusion, in the long, quiet pause before the answer arrives. The introvert's natural habitat is exactly that space. But here's the psychological tension. Being built for depth doesn't protect you from being taught to distrust it. If you've spent your whole life being told your processing is too slow, your answers too considered, your silence too awkward, you start to internalize the verdict. You start to believe the world's timeline is the correct one, that speed is sophistication, that confidence is competence. And so you perform, you rush, you speak before you're ready to fill a silence that never needed filling. And in doing so, you abandon the very superpower you were born with. This is not a small thing. This is the quiet tragedy of misunderstood intelligence. The discomfort you felt in rooms that reward noise, that wasn't evidence of your limitation. It was evidence of your mismatch with a system that never knew what to do with you. Core concept teaching, the Feynman frame. Let me offer you a mental model, a simple one. Richard Feynman, physicist, genius, chronic simplifier, believed that if you couldn't explain something to a child, you didn't actually understand it. That the act of translating complexity into plain language was itself a diagnostic tool. It showed you exactly where your understanding broke down. Apply that same principle to how introverts read people. An introvert doesn't just see behavior. They instinctively ask, what does this behavior mean? They compress observation into pattern, pattern into model, model into prediction. Watch someone long enough, quietly, without the pressure to respond, and you start to see the structure beneath the surface. You see that the person who speaks most confidently about a topic is often the one who stopped questioning it. You see that the person who laughs the loudest is sometimes using laughter as punctuation, not expression. You see the difference between someone processing in real time and someone performing a script they wrote before they even arrived. This is not cynicism. This is ecological intelligence, a concept Gardner identified as one of the 8 forms of human knowing. The capacity to perceive patterns in an environment, to track movement and change, to notice what others filter out. Most people look. Introverts observe. The difference is intention. The difference is depth of field. And here is the simple truth. This is a learnable skill for anyone, not just for those born quiet. But introverts have been practicing it involuntarily for years, because in a world that didn't give them the floor, they learned to make meaning from the margins. Silence was not their retreat. Silence was their laboratory. Identity expansion, from technique to mindset. Now I want to challenge something you might believe about yourself. Maybe you've always thought of intelligence as a fixed thing, a capacity you either have or you don't, a genetic inheritance, not a practice.
And maybe, somewhere along the way, you assigned yourself a category. I'm not that smart. I'm not analytical. I'm not the observant type. But Gardner's entire life's work was a refutation of that story. He didn't just say we have multiple intelligences. He said the way we develop those intelligences is shaped by what we pay attention to, by what we're given permission to pursue, by which rooms we're allowed to be quiet in. Mastery, real mastery, doesn't look like confidence, not at first. It looks like curiosity that refuses to stop asking. It looks like skepticism that never becomes cynicism. It looks like intellectual humility, the willingness to say, I noticed something, but I don't fully understand it yet. That's the introvert's practice, whether they've named it or not. They sit with incomplete pictures. They resist the urge to close a loop prematurely. They hold ambiguity longer than most people find comfortable. And that tolerance for ambiguity? That's not a personality quirk. That's the foundation of sophisticated thinking. Bloom's highest tier, create, doesn't happen in people who rush to answers. It happens in people who are willing to sit in the question long enough for something new to emerge. So if you've been waiting for permission to call yourself intelligent because you don't perform intelligence the way the room expects, This is your permission. The mind that moves quietly often moves furthest. Here's where everything changes. When you begin to understand the introvert's mode of perception, truly understand it, not just intellectually acknowledge it, something shifts in how you read the world. You stop fearing silence in conversation. You start hearing what it contains. You stop rushing to fill every gap with certainty. You start noticing that the gaps are often where the truth lives. You stop performing competence. You start building it, slowly, quietly, in the margins of your own attention. And here's the philosophical core of it. We are all, every single one of us, swimming in more information than we can consciously process. Every conversation, every glance, every environment is transmitting signals we partially receive and mostly ignore. The introvert, by temperament and by practice, has learned to slow the filter, to let more of the signal in, not because they're special, but because they were never distracted by the performance of processing out loud. This changes how you approach problems. You stop asking, what is the fastest answer, and start asking, what is the most complete picture? You stop treating uncertainty as a deficiency and start treating it as information. You stop seeing your need for quiet reflection as a social liability and start seeing it as a cognitive asset. And suddenly, problems that paralyzed you begin to open up, not because you got smarter, because you got slower in the right places. Creativity, as psychology has repeatedly confirmed, doesn't live in activation, it lives in incubation, in the long, still, apparently unproductive period before the insight arrives. That period has always been the introvert's native country, and the rest of us are only now learning to visit. So let me ask you something. Not a quiz, not a challenge, just a question to carry with you. When was the last time you sat in a room and let yourself be the one who watched? Not passively, not disengaged, but fully, attentively, generously present, without the pressure to speak, to perform, to prove you were there. When was the last time you trusted the slow thought over the fast one? When was the last time you called your silence a strength? Because here is what I think Bloom and Gardner were both reaching toward, in their different languages, across their different disciplines. Intelligence is not a performance. It is a relationship with information, with uncertainty, with other human beings, and most importantly, with yourself. And introverts, in their quiet, systematic, endlessly patient way, have always understood something that loud rooms tend to forget. Understanding takes time. Real understanding, the kind that changes how you see, not just what you know. And the person most likely to arrive there first is rarely the one who spoke the loudest. It's the one in the corner who said almost nothing and noticed everything.